Good day everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reacting to an interview on why classical architecture is better than modernist architecture. This video was done by the YouTuber Cave of Apellis and he covers a lot of other architectural content and historical content, so make sure you check out his channel. The video is actually a 1 hour plus long video, so I'm just going to be reacting on some key aspects and giving my thoughts on it. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it.
Greatest contribution is that I'm allow myself to learn from the past and to look backward. What did they do right? And if you have that mindset, then you will come to great conclusions, and you will also come to the conclusions why we like the classical so much.
Okay, I certainly agree with Mr. Diamant here, because to actually go forward, sometimes you have to actually look back at mistakes and patterns that people have actually done before, so you could actually use it to anticipate any issues in future. So I believe that in architecture as a whole, we should actually try to always take information, because it's actually a lot of information that have been stored for over 2,000 years, and some people just choose to ignore it, which is actually wrong. So I actually think I agree with Mr. Diamant on his take on you actually need to look into the past and actually get information from the past to make certain decisions. It doesn't mean we should stay in the past, but looking into the past and getting information is also a way of moving forward. All right, so the next question we're going to ask ourselves as architects is, how feasible is this movement? How much classical architectural buildings have been built, and how many case studies are exist in real life for us to look at and say, okay, we could actually look at this and say this thing is actually possible. So let's listen to what Mr. Diamant has to say about that.
Picture says more than 1,000 words, so it's very psychological. You show a practical example. If someone says it's impossible to build, well, here you can see, this is new built, this was built yesterday, and this has an impact, because then people want more, because if other people can do it, why can't we do it? You should start, the one of the many goals with this is to start people questioning, why aren't we allowed? It's not just theory, you can see practical examples. They are doing this in our neighboring countries. If you live in Sweden, why can they build classical in Germany? If you live in Belgium, why can they build classical?
With the setting said that they can actually build classical buildings, the next question is, does politics have a play on the style of architecture used? A lot of people have theorized that politics actually plays a role in the style of architecture. So let's see what he has to say about the style of architecture as it relates to the revenue or the politics around a certain area.
About why American universities build so many new classical buildings, unlike their European counterparts, is because they are dependent on alumni donations. So you need to foster a proud alumni. And what better way to foster a proud alumni than having students that want to hang out at campus all the time. And if you build buildings like this, it's become part of the identifications, and then 30 years later, when you are CEO of a company, then you make this 300 million donation.
Okay, on this topic, I'll actually say again that I agree with Mr. Diamant. Personally, in school, there are some buildings that actually used to attract alumni donations, in the sense that once a building is actually prestigious and iconic, the old students of the school will actually want to preserve it as a cultural heritage or kind of a memory icon inside the school environment. So I think that, yes, I agree with him that classical architecture can also help foster, kind of generate revenue due to alumni donations, and thus improving the whole economy of the school. Classical architecture is actually kind of tricky, because you could say it's actually fading away, and at the same time you could also say it's actually rebuilding back up, because some people actually prefer classical because they actually like that whole feeling of something with such relic ambience, sort of. So it's actually quite intriguing that you meet some people and they'll be like they prefer classical. Some people is that they prefer actual modernism. But let's look at what Mr. Diamant have to say about people and their preferences based on the style of architecture they actually want.
Classical, everyone knows that people prefer classical. Why otherwise, in a very free market society like the American, would American colleges build classical?
Well, personally, I don't actually agree with Mr. Diamant on this one. Reason because I don't think beauty is objective, meaning that what is beautiful, and what is not beautiful is not beautiful. People actually have preferences, and it's actually a big world out there, and there are some people that genuinely prefer minimalist designs over classical designs, which I've actually personally observed. But the big question is, people always talk about when they hear classical is classical not too expensive, all these conics and all. So how sustainable is it? How cost efficient is it? So let's hear what Mr. Diamant has to say on cost efficiency of classical buildings.
Well, basically, they build these buildings. This may be more expensive to build in the short term than an ugly concrete box, but in the long term, they will benefit hugely, because of all the alumni donations that they receive. The pride that they instill on their students, that I belong to this campus, and it's beautiful.
I actually somehow agree with Mr. Diamant on this one, in the sense that classical architecture, of course, initially is actually more expensive to build because of the intricate details they actually add to the facade and all. But on the long run, you actually see it's more cost efficient, because a building that can't, or anything in short, if you buy a shoe now and the shoe can last you for 10 years and you buy it, let's say $100, and you now have the option to buy another shoe that is just $10, but the thing will barely last you for 2 months, it will be more sustainable to buy the $100 shoe because it will actually last you a longer time. How does it relate to classical buildings? Classical buildings actually have tendencies to outlive its function and retain cultural value. In turn, that makes people want to preserve this kind of buildings. And once they preserve it, it means the building outlives its function. And you can see some buildings living over 100 years. Although some people have made the counter argument that modernism started in the 20th century, so they have not given modernism the chance to actually outlive its function for that long. So it's actually something that time will tell. But I actually feel that till proven otherwise, I think classical buildings actually last longer and actually in turn is more cost efficient than modernist buildings.
The reason why we're not building beautiful is because of modernist ideology. And if you teach people that, they become quite angry, because most people, a majority, assume that all the ugliness of the modern world is a necessity. It's because of costs, it's because of some kind of practical function, I think. No, all the ugliness of the modern world is 100% ideology. We can decide, we can build beautiful buildings that are not more expensive than ugly buildings.
Oh, Mr. Diamant is a harsh one there. But I actually kind of see where it's coming from. That although I don't think every modernist building is actually an ugly building, but I actually see where it's coming from. That is actually an ideology. So this actually takes me back to something I've heard before, that people actually just do things because they just see people doing it and they don't actually understand the reason why it's done. Like, for example, if you see maybe when a herd of cows are moving, the cows behind the other cows are just following the cows because they are moving. They don't even know why they are moving or why they are moving. So I actually think in architecture it's kind of limiting, in the sense we should actually know the reasons and know, kind of see things on the brighter picture or bigger picture to actually understand why we are doing things or why we are not doing certain things. So I actually think that the ideology of modernism is not as if I'm saying modernism itself is entirely bad, but modernists should also try to expand their view, in the sense that they should also try to pick things from the past and pick things that also kind of counter some issues they have based on, let's say, the longevity of the project, how versatile the project can be based on its appearance, and actually kind of modify it a bit to actually yield a kind of better result or something. All right, so we have been hearing about classical buildings, classical architecture, but what exactly is classical architecture? If someone asked us on the road, like, what is classical architecture or what is traditional architecture, what are we going to answer? Let's hear what Mr. Diamant has to say about that.
So you don't know to articulate what you want. But what is the classical tradition? The classical tradition is, yes, of course, in Western civilization at least, or in European civilization, it has, the basis in ancient Greece and Roman times. It's, it's a way of, understanding proportions and dimensions and division of facade, how you create a building. And from this understanding, And of course, that there is, of course, style elements. You have certain style elements that are associated with classical architecture. But with this understanding how you create a facade that come from these ancient times, and what are correct proportions, this is the understanding. This is the classical architecture with the base in ancient Greek and Roman civilizations. And from that on, a multitude of new styles have been created during the centuries.
That is spot on from Mr. Diamant. But when talking about classical architecture, we will always trace it back to ancient Greece and ancient Roman Empire. Of course, there are different variations of it over time due to different cultures using the classical style. But classical architecture all of them has a similar characteristic. They have a similar origin and similar foundation, in the sense they actually use elements like balance, they use symmetry, they actually have a flow to the facade. So that actually gives the human mind, like someone could easily read the facade of a classical building. That's what actually makes it kind of unique, and it's kind of like the basic foundation of design of buildings. It's just simple, it flows, and it's just balanced, and it's good in of itself. Okay, another thing that sets classical architecture apart from other styles of architecture is actually the intricate facade. So let's hear what Mr. Diamant has to say about the facade of classical architecture and also the facades of modernist architecture.
Your environment, your built environment, is readable. The baseline that you find on many classical buildings also keeps your eyes straight. They don't go up and down. If you look at modernist buildings, they lack a baseline. It's all the same, the bottom floor and the top floor is the same, and the roof is flat. The building, it's much harder for our brains to read. And now, when you have this mutated modernism of today, if you look at this building that I took an example, because it's a very good example of the latest trend, you cannot read this building. With this building and this building, you have part symmetries. So you can instantly recognize different pairs of windows. You can read this building very quickly. With this building, your brain will struggle to find a pattern. You will not be able to find a pattern.
Okay, once again, I like what Mr. Diamant is actually talking about classical architecture, that they have a base and it's easy for somebody to actually read the facade. If you go to a good classical building, you could actually locate the entrance, you could actually know this is the upper floors of the building, and you actually easily be able to detect the roof of the building. And this is also my problem with pure modernist buildings. I'm not talking about the contemporary buildings of today. I'm talking of pure modernist buildings, that the building is looking too monotonic, that you cannot actually read everything. You have to actually observe very well, and it's kind of strenuous, which is actually not a good show for a good architectural design. But unlike that, classical actually gives your mind direction to actually understand the building without the need of asking too much questions. Okay, so in the next question, the interviewer actually described how classical architecture relates with nature. Although it might sound odd, because classical architecture, they don't actually plant greenery around in classical architecture often, or plant green areas on the roof. But he actually explains something and I actually find it very reasonable what he talks about. So let's watch out for that.
Many of the aspects of classical architecture, you can't trace it back to something you find in nature.
Yes.
In a way. You can see the columns are like stems on a tree,
yes,
trunks on a tree, and these when there are a lot of columns, it's almost like walking in the forest, and you feel safe, and it's still the wind comes through, but a bit more protected, and the spires or the towers are like tops of a tree.
I actually love what the interviewer said, because it's kind of the first time I've heard that kind of thing, that how classical architecture relates to nature, in the sense you feel secure, you feel like you're in a garden. It kind of gives this kind of ambience, the lights coming from the skylight, and it actually gives you this feeling like you're in a forest. So it's actually something that once he made those statements, I actually started connecting things together and was like, this might actually make sense. I've not confirmed it though, but I actually look forward to checking out stuff like that.
They are very, very afraid people, and they are afraid to stick out, from the established dogma. And the established dogma is that everything must be new, you are never allowed to look back, and function. Previously it was, form follows function or something like that. Now it's just, it has never been done before, therefore it must be done. And that's the highest value. So the
words were a little bit harsh though, considering going out to modern architects out there, but I actually feel he has a point in the taking things from the past, and modern architects always being like, we need to always only do things that have not been done before. I'm not trying to downplay innovation. Innovation is very good. We need to always try to break boundaries. That is how human beings, that is how human evolution have reached the stage where we are today. But it's always good that, because you cannot just ignore over 2,000 years of knowledge in the pursuit of achieving new things. We always have to go back, take some knowledge and take some principles from the past and apply it in our current day designs. Of course, we can make changes and additions and modifications, but we should also try to use those background knowledge, which will actually be helpful, because one alone is not enough. 1 + 1 = 2, which is better. So I feel we should kind of try and fuse everything to get something better, unless they are contradictory.
But it must happen, in a faster pace, of course. That's why it's so important to educate new classical architects and to show young people you can be a classical architect. You don't need to be a modernist architect. You can be a classical architect.
All right, so Mr. Diamant just talked about the impact of educating people on the freedom of the style of architecture they want to be. Particularly, he said it's good that we educate people that you can actually be young ones, that you can actually become a classical architect, not become a modernist architect. What is my take on this? You should actually give people the freedom to make the choice of style they want to actually follow. If they want to become modernist architects, they should also do the modernism, but they should understand how to be responsible while making design decisions. But they should also be encouraged to, if they want to follow classical architecture, they can actually follow classical architecture and become a great architect as well. So because I feel that it's very important that there's always this subconscious impact while institutions give students. For instance, if somebody is doing maybe a modernist building design or a modernist style design, and someone is doing a classical style design, if often that the modernist student is rewarded more with marks and praises and so on, even though, let's say in theory, they put the same effort in terms of their whole design build-up. The classical guy puts effort as well, but the modernist guy is actually being rewarded constantly. I feel subconsciously to actually discourage people from following a classical path. So I feel that the institutional lecturers and educators should actually try to put in effort to actually try to see the values in different styles of architecture, to actually be able to encourage the use of different styles and actually mentor students on how to use this different style efficiently in architecture. So that is just my own take on this. Okay, so I think I'm going to be ending the video here. Of course, the link of the full video will be in the description below, so you can check out the video at Cave of Apellis, watch the full 2 hours or 1.5 hours interview on where you actually get the full scope and the full explanations Michael Diamant was making on why classical architecture is much better than modernist architecture, and why classical architecture can actually make the ugly world, in quotes, more beautiful. So I'll be making a part 2 on this video to actually explain the other aspects. And so, but while waiting for that, you could do us the favor by hitting the like button, subscribe to this channel for more content like this, hit the notification bell to get notified once we release new videos. Don't forget to drop your take on what you feel about classical architecture, because I'll be very interested on hearing your takes, whether you disagree or agree with Michael Diamant. Personally, I lean towards the part of agreeing with him more, because I actually saw some solid points both the interviewer and him made on the topic. So with all that said and done, we are going to see you next time. Thank you very much.